Since Canuck Play unfortunately had to shutter its game studio, cancel Maximum Football 21, and sell the Maximum Football IP to Modus Games, the other major simulation indie football title, Axis Football, has found itself without any major competition in 2021. There are other indie football games on the market, such as Sunday Rivals, but that is a more arcade-style game and isn't a direct competitor to Axis. Heck, it didn't even have a season or franchise mode at release and had to have that added in by a post-release patch. I do own the Steam version of Sunday Rivals, but I haven't played much of it yet. The only other real competition for Axis Football is the indie game Legend Bowl. I've received several requests to play Legend Bowl and to create content for it, including a request by the game's creator himself. Don't worry, King Javo, I fully intend to give your game a fair chance. I've been holding off for that game to go on sale on Steam. You see, my partner and I recently had a baby boy at the end of this summer, so I've been cutting back a little bit on entertainment expenses because, babies are expensive, and also I just don't have as much time to be playing these darn things. I did, however, receive a $50 Steam gift card for my birthday, and Legend Bowl happened to go on a small discount for Steam's Halloween sale, so I finally did go ahead and buy it, along with another indie football game called Pro Football Strategy. I hope to play both through the holiday season, assuming that the baby lets me, and hopefully we'll have some content on them in the coming months. In the meantime, Axis Football has been the only indie football game that I've played this year, so I can't really do my usual thing of comparing Axis to Maximum or some other indie football game, because there isn't a Maximum football game to compare Axis to, and I haven't played the other indie football games. I could do a direct comparison between Axis Football 21 and Madden 22's supposedly upgraded franchise mode, but as I've said in previous videos about these indie games, I'm hesitant to directly compare a low-budget indie product to a billion-dollar licensed game from a major publisher. It's just not fair. Maybe I'll revisit that topic later if I get a lot of demand for it, but for now, I don't plan on doing that. In the meantime, if you are interested in my thoughts on Madden 22's supposedly improved franchise mode, you can check out my video on that topic, which will be linked in the description, as well as the full review of the game on my personal blog at www.megabearsfan.net. So instead of comparing Axis Football to any of its direct competition, I've decided that I will instead focus exclusively on Axis Football and will share my hopes and expectations for where I would like to see the game go from here. With EA releasing its college football game in 2023 and 2K presumably releasing its non-simulation game in 2022, Axis Football needs to take big strides in the next year or two in order to remain relevant and competitive. I'm going to spend a video or two going over my personal wish list for how I think Axis Football can take those strides and remain competitive in a market suddenly saturated with big budget football releases. I'll start with a gameplay wish list and then move on to a franchise wish list. And if these are successful, or if my patrons request it, I may follow these up with a third short video about my wish list for Modus Games' upcoming Maximum Football game, whenever the heck that's supposed to release. So, enjoy! So, admittedly, most of the gameplay improvements that I'm going to be talking about here are basically just improvements to animation and logic that bring Axis Football up to the level of some of the bigger budget football games back in the days of like the PlayStation 2. This is a small budget indie football game with only a few people working on it, so, it does have a lot of catch-up work to do still. One of the biggest problems that has plagued Axis Football for as long as I have been playing it, since 2018, is its poor pass catching and pass defense animations and logic. Catching or defending passes has always felt like a total crapshoot in this game. A crapshoot that more often than not seems to favor the CPU's deep passing game at the expense of making my defense look bad. In general, the animations for catching and defending passes are not very robust or well developed. Receivers and DBs often just kind of stand there, put their arms up, and wait for the ball. Players can catch passes in stride as of Axis Football 20, but there still aren't animations for players jumping, diving, or going to the ground to make catches. The ball either hits the player in the chest and sticks to him, or it bounces off and falls to the ground, and which of the two it does seems to be completely random or arbitrary. There also aren't any animations for defenders jamming receivers, jostling for position, or swatting at the ball. They also just kind of stand there with their arms out, and the ball either sticks to them for an interception, or it bounces off to count as a deflection, and it's even hard just to tell whether the receiver or the defender is the player with the better position to make a play on the ball to begin with, because they almost seem like they kind of stand inside of each other, occupying the same space at the same time. So that's also something that will need to be addressed because, in a simulation football game, we don't want players literally phasing through each other. This is perhaps the one area of the game where I most want to see improvement. Not only do I hope to see better animations and interactions in the defensive secondary, I'd also like to see some better pass trajectories from the quarterbacks so that receivers and DBs don't have to stand around and wait for the ball as much. They can more frequently catch it in stride, or, have to run to it in order to make a play on it. It would also be nice to have some separate defensive inputs for swatting away a pass versus trying to intercept a pass, but, one thing at a time. This leads me to my second wishlist item, which is the ability to lead passes in one direction or another. Axis currently has an option to aim passes manually with the mouse on a PC or with the right analog stick on a console controller, which does allow the user to place a pass literally anywhere on the field. It works pretty well with the mouse on PC, though I don't use it because I find it very difficult to complete passes this way. Some kind of visual aid to tell where to place the ball would be helpful. However, I don't use the aimed passing with the mouse, in large part because the keyboard controls are very stiff and uncomfortable. I much prefer to use a gamepad for movement and other functions, and the right analog stick of the gamepad simply isn't as responsive and accurate as the mouse, so I stick with the icon-based passing. If there were somehow some way to aim the pass with the mouse in my right hand and still have access to all the other game controls on a gamepad with my left hand, I would totally choose that option, but I have no idea how the heck that would work. Anyway, with icon-based passing, there is currently no way that I am aware of to lead passes in one direction or another, even though I try doing it every time I throw a pass just because of muscle memory from every other football game that I've ever played. It is thus very hard to throw receivers open or to take advantage of superior leverage against the cover man, which again doesn't really matter anyway because the wide receiver DB animations don't really matter in that context. But anyway, seemingly open routes will get thrown right into coverage or, to a position where the receiver can't get to it. In Axis's defense, Axis 21 did add the ability to anticipate the break in a receiver's route and throw the ball prior to the receiver making that break. This is a huge improvement that dramatically improves the passing game, especially for short and intermediate timing routes. But it's still kinda up to luck whether the pass is completed into tight coverage or if the quarterback just sails the ball, right into the arms of waiting defenders. So it could still use some more work. With the improvements made to zone coverages in 2021, in which CPU defenders will now do a better job of prioritizing multiple receivers that run into or through their zone, and with receiving and pass defense animations being in the state that they are, it's that much more important for Axis football to give me control over where I place the pass, so that I can lead receivers away from defenders or hit those tiny gaps in tight coverages. Perhaps the second biggest weakness in the overall look and feel of Axis football, after its catching animations, is its blocking animations. Blocking in Axis football is very stiff and robotic. Blockers just kinda lock arms with the defender, and they both stand there until the defender suddenly pops out of the block. There's no real sense of physicality or push and pull in these animations, and it seems completely arbitrary when pass rushers break free. The game settings say that there are buttons for performing finesse and power moves to break blocks, but I'm not really sure if these work because I don't ever see any actual animations associated with these inputs. I press the buttons and it depletes a part of my defender's stamina bar, and then the block either continues or it doesn't. I'm not sure if these inputs actually do anything other than deplete the defender's stamina bar. At the very least, future Axis football games need to have some animations for block-breaking moves like swim moves, rip moves, spinning out of the block, or bull rushing the blocker. I'd also like to see better pocket formation from the offensive line. Right now, the line doesn't really create a passing pocket at all. They just kind of stand in a line. Oftentimes, they just all kind of clump up into a pile, like right in the middle of the offensive formation. This makes it very difficult as a QB to read the pocket and know how long I have to get the pass off before I'm sacked. And I sure as hell never step up into the pocket in Axis football since A, there's no pocket to begin with, and B, the pass rushers can come off their blocks at any arbitrary moment without any warning and get a sack. So it's always backpedaling or scrambling off to the side for me. Future Axis games also need some better pathing AI for blitzers. Blitzing backers will often run right into the backs of their engaged defensive linemen and then get stuck running in place. This effectively allows a single blocker to block 2 or 3 pass rushers at the same time, which makes blitzing a very ineffective defensive strategy. Unless you can get around the edge with an outside linebacker or cornerback blitz quick enough to actually get to the QB, you're probably not going to get to the QB, because those inside blitzes will just get hung up on all the activity at the line of scrimmage. Another area where Axis football lacks some animations and user agency is with its running animations and ball carrier moves. Currently, we have juke left and juke right commands, a spin command, and a dive command. I can never really get the jukes to work. The defense always tackles me anyway. The dive command also seems like it's easily interrupted if a tackle is triggered, so the only meaningful move that the user can perform with a runner is the spin move. I would like for functional stiff arms and shoulder charges to be added to the game. Axis should also add the ability to send offensive players in motion pre-play. The motion can either be baked into the play, similar to what Maximum Football did, or the game can allow the offense to select which player to send in motion, which is what Madden does. I feel like the former is probably simpler and would also likely be less exploitable. It would also probably be easier for the CPU team to use if it's baked into the actual play design. In any case, sending a player in motion is a powerful tool for real-life offenses to make pre-snap reads of the defense. How the defense moves in response to the motion is often a key indicator for the offense as to whether the coverage will be man coverage or zone coverage. Of course, if motion is to be used in this way in Axis football, then defensive logic will also have to change so that defenses would line up in their base formation in zone coverages instead of lining up to man assignments as they currently do. And they would also probably have to be able to shift corners or linebackers in order to adjust to a motion receiver or tight end coming across the formation. Motion can also be used as part of the actual play design. Motioning a tight end is often used in power running schemes to give that tight end extra leverage for a kick-out block. And receiver motion can be used to get that receiver up to full speed before the snap so that he can receive a jet sweep or a reverse at full speed. Lastly, putting players in motion is also an extra activity that teams can do at the line of scrimmage in order to run some additional time off the clock. This would improve the realism of 15-minute quarter games and would increase the time of possession of CPU teams without me having to repeatedly shift my linebackers back and forth in order to force the CPU to run some time off. Speaking of running off time, even though Axis football includes clock management plays for kneeling and spiking the ball, the game lacks a true hurry-up offense mechanic. Both teams have to huddle up between every single play. The accelerated clock disables itself during the 2-minute warning, which allows teams to get in and out of the huddle very quickly and can be used to mimic a hurry-up drill. But this also means that teams don't have to use timeouts, since very little time runs off the clock between plays anyway. So I would like to see the accelerated clock stay on during 2-minute warnings, even if it maybe doesn't run quite as much time off the clock in order to simulate the idea that the offenses are trying to get in and out of the huddle more quickly. but then have an actual hurry-up mechanic. Maybe you run up to the line of scrimmage and have to audible to a new play, as was the case in old-school PS1 Madden games. Or maybe the play call screen opens up at the line of scrimmage, as in contemporary Madden games. Or maybe Axis could try something completely different, and maybe have the user queue up multiple plays in the huddle during the play call screen, and then run those plays in sequence when they do the hurry up, with the option, of course, to audible out of them if you see fit. It would also be kind of neat if we could have a separate set of audibles for normal gameplay situations versus hurry-up offense situations. So we should be able to set these in the game settings and then either automatically go into the hurry-up audibles during 2-minute drill, or maybe have like a button to toggle the hurry-up audibles on from the play call screen. This way, if we're playing a run-heavy scheme or like a short West Coast style scheme, we can still have a bunch of plays in our audibles for those schemes, but then also have like deeper passes and passes to the sidelines and stuff like that we can switch to during hurry-up situations. As far as I can tell, Axis Football currently does not have any logic at all for substituting reserve players in for situational roles. There's no running back committees, no speedy pass-catching backs being subbed in for third downs or bruising power backs being subbed in for short yardage or goal line situations. We also don't see pass-catching tight ends being subbed in for passing situations. I do this, of course, but the CPU never does. On the other side of the ball, we never see outside linebackers being subbed in for pass rush situations as defensive ends, nor do we see safeties being subbed in as linebackers for prevent situations or 2-minute situations. In fact, come to think of it, I don't think that I've ever specifically noticed the CPU team subbing out players due to fatigue. My players get fatigued, and I sub them out when they turn yellow or red in the play call screen, but I don't know if the CPU is doing this. They sure as heck aren't doing it with their running backs. I don't expect extensive substitution logic, since that would be very complicated to implement, but at the very least, I would like to see CPU teams use more of their running backs, so that they don't end up with a single back getting every single carry for every single game. But in a broader sense, every team does have to maintain a 53-man roster, which means every team has a lot of depth, especially at positions like running back and wide receiver. It would be nice to see those players get some more situational reps in, so that that depth actually matters. The CPU teams in Axis Football also never use timeouts, except in 2-minute situations. I would like to see timeouts being used for more purposes other than simply conserving clock during the 2-minute drill. In real-life football, teams use timeouts for a variety of reasons, whether it's to give their defense a chance to rest and regroup against a fast-paced offense, or to avoid running a play with an obvious mismatch, or to avoid taking a procedure penalty such as a delay of game or too many players on the field, or simply to coach up the players before an important play like a 3rd or 4th down conversion attempt. None of these uses for timeouts are replicated in Axis Football, or actually in any football video game that I'm aware of for that matter. Not even the legendary NFL 2K did timeouts correctly. One thing that Axis Football could do to make timeouts more useful would be to restrict the use of the pre-play team strategy function so that it is only available at points in the game where the team's coach would realistically be able to talk to the players on the field, which would be during clock stoppages. I propose that this team strategy widget should only be accessible when a change of possession happens, during a quarter break, during the 2-minute warning, or during a timeout. If the user wants to change your strategic focus mid-drive, you'll now need to take a timeout in order to stop play and coach up your players. The CPU team should, of course, also be programmed to make team strategy changes in certain situations, and if one of these situations comes up mid-drive, the CPU should be programmed to call a timeout if they have them available. For example, if I'm driving down the field with a bruising power running attack, the CPU should maybe take a timeout as I approach the red zone in order to switch to focusing on defending the run. Hopefully they also change their play calling to line up with this shift in strategy as well. The trick here is to balance this mechanic so that it isn't exploitable. In the above example, we don't want the user to be able to respond to the CPU's timeout by simply changing their own strategy to suddenly start passing the ball because you know the CPU will be focusing on stopping the run now. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure how best to resolve this. Perhaps changing your strategic focus during the other team's timeout confers less of a bonus to the new strategic focus. Or maybe sticking with your current strategic focus during the other team's timeout gives you an even larger bonus towards that focus. So maybe choosing to focus on defend pass gives you, say, +3 to your player's coverage ratings. If the other team calls a timeout, you can shift to a different focus, such as defending the run, for a smaller +2 buff to tackling and block breaking. Or you can stick with your current focus and have it improved to +4 for your coverage ratings. I don't know. What do you think? As for calling a timeout to avoid a procedure penalty, this could also be accomplished by adding pre-play motion to the offensive play design, as I suggested before, since the time it takes to send the player in motion might lead to a delay of game and necessitate the use of a timeout to prevent the penalty. Perhaps the accelerated clock could also be adjusted to have some variability. So maybe the accelerated clock runs the play clock down to like 12 seconds ±3 seconds, so that the teams break the huddle and line up with somewhere between 9 and 15 seconds left on the play clock. The amount of time left could be random each play, or it could be based on how long it took the offense to select its play, or it could be based on the outcome of the previous play. So, for example, if the previous play was an incomplete pass deep down the field, then it takes longer for the players to run back to the huddle, so more time should run off the play clock. Alternatively, if the previous play was a simple inside handoff for like a 2-yard gain, then the offense is able to get everybody in and out of the huddle quicker and less time runs off the clock. In any case, having a variable amount of time at the line of scrimmage would increase the risk of a delay of game penalty and would potentially necessitate the use of the occasional timeout for the human user or for the CPU team. And now we come to the oft-overlooked third phase of football. Axis football is also in dire need of a complete special teams overhaul. First and foremost, I'd like to see more of the special teams rules implemented and enforced correctly. For example, a muffed punt return should be considered a fumble and a live ball that can be picked up by the kicking team. The risk of muffing a punt should be mitigated by the addition of a fair catch mechanic, which is currently not in the game at all. Axis also currently does not have the ability to kneel in the end zone for a touchback, and CPU returners will run the ball out of the back of the end zone, which is easily exploitable by the user if you have a kicker with a strong leg. I'm able to run my returner out the back of the end zone for a touchback, but the CPU doesn't know to do this because they apparently have no concept that touchbacks are even in the game. In 2021, Axis Football added punt and kick returners to the depth charts, along with relevant stat tracking for punt and kick returns. Nice. I'd also like to see depth chart positions for other special teams positions, such as the long snapper, field goal holder, and coverage teams. This would allow me to use backup and reserve players as specialists and not have to risk accumulating extra fatigue or injuries to offensive or defensive starters on special teams plays. It also opens up the possibility to have standout special teams players, the classic Steve Tasker type or someone like Devin Hester. Of course, positions like long snapper and holder aren't really meaningful unless there are relevant mechanics for them. I had previously made an entire video about the long snapper position in Madden, in which I recommend that Madden should include a risk of a botched snap or hold on field goals, so that the long snapper and holder are actually relevant positions in the game. The same argument can be made for Axis Football, so I encourage you to check out that long snapper video if you want to hear more about my ideas. Lastly, there should be some simple trick plays on special teams. There are currently no fake kicks, which means if your opponent lines up for a field goal or punt, you can go all out on trying to block it, since there is no risk that it will turn out to be a fake. Go ahead, blitz a speedy corner to try to block that punt instead of covering the wideout. There is no risk that the punter will throw to that wideout for a gimme fourth down conversion. It would also be fun to see some trick kick returns, such as reverses or designed hook and ladder plays, but these might be very difficult to implement and might not work correctly, so I'm not going to hold my breath, and maybe it's better that Axis doesn't try to implement them quite yet. Finally, the last of my gameplay wishlist suggestions. One of my biggest pet peeves with Axis football has always been the fact that my defense always ranks dead last in passing yards allowed. I can shut down the run, and I can stop the opponent from scoring, but my team is constantly giving up big passing plays, due in large part to the issues I brought up earlier with pass catching and pass defense. Axis football has separate difficulty settings for playing offense and defense, but the problem here is that if I increase the difficulty of playing defense in order to make the CPU run game more dangerous, I end up giving up even more big pass plays and further imbalancing my game stats. But if I decrease the difficulty of playing defense in order to hopefully improve my pass defense, then the CPU's running game will become even more ineffective, and the CPU's play calling will become even more one-dimensional and pass-heavy, which probably will just negate any gains that I made in defending the passes by lowering the difficulty setting. As such, I'd like to see more fine-tuning of difficulty. I don't expect full slider adjustments like what you see in big-budget sports games like Madden or NFL 2K, but it would be nice if Axis could at least split up its offensive and defensive difficulty settings to have independent settings for run versus pass difficulty. This way, I can hopefully make the CPU's run game more difficult without having to make my defense play worse against the pass. I also wouldn't mind seeing some kind of difficulty setting for special teams. Here's what I propose. These sorts of options would give users a better ability to custom tailor the gameplay experience and the challenge of the game to suit their particular playstyle, skill levels, and preferences, and I think would just be an all-around good thing to have in the game. Well, that's my gameplay wish list. A nice even 10 items, in fact. Do I expect it can all get done in 1 year in time for Axis 22? No, of course not. This is probably at least a couple years of work for a small team like Axis. But with new indie games like Legend Bowl on the rise, Maximum Football coming back under a new developer, and the big budget football market about to get very crowded, Axis really needs to take a big leap forward in the next year or two. I think these 10 items will help Axis to better compete with its direct indie competition, and maybe even help it to stand up against its big budget cousins. In a couple of weeks, the next video will cover my wishlist for improving Axis Football's franchise mode, in the hopes that people will continue to claim that it's better than Madden's, and maybe it actually will be. Hope to see you back then. Thanks for watching.